Okay, let's talk about your name, your logo, and your marketing materials. This is always the fun part. So you've decided you're going to do a podcast. You know what kind of format you're going to do. You know how long the podcast is going to be. Now it's time to get your name and your logo and your marketing materials ready to go. So, the first thing you need to do is create a podcast name. And this can be an exciting and daunting project. One of my favorite things is to use ChatGPT, Claude, AI, one of those to help you come up with ideas. But here's some tips on how to create a really good podcast name. So, you want to be clever, right? You want to be something that's relevant, something that reflects your content and your target audience that they're going to identify with. Keep it short and memorable, 1 to 4 words at most. Check for existing podcasts with a similar name. Also, check to see if the web address for your name is available because you might want to get the URL just so you have it. Also, look to see if there are social media handles or YouTube channels with that name because you just want to avoid any other podcasts that might be out there because you want to avoid any other kind of confusion. Sometimes it's hard. You might have something that's somewhat similar, but as long as it's different enough, then that's okay. But do your research so you know. I would always include keywords for discoverability, and that means like so that Google or any of the other search engines can find you. So, one of the things that I'm doing with this podcast that I'm launching is Your Marketing Mentor. That's my kind of tagline, and it's got marketing in it. And I thought that, from a discoverability standpoint, I felt like that was a little bit better than my other podcast was this Bosses with Baggage. But they also have two totally different takes and perspectives and goals. So I have two podcasts, but they serve very different purposes. Allow for growth. So if you're going to create a podcast, make sure it's niche, but it's not so niche that it doesn't allow your business to grow with you. So, for example, my podcast, Your Marketing Mentor, marketing is a big topic. So, it allows me to grow in my business. I don't think I would do a podcast that was like Your Instagram Reel Mentor, because that now kind of puts me a little bit more into a specific box. Now, if I knew my business long term was going to focus on Instagram Reels, that would be totally cool, right? That's fine. But it's not. It's more sort of overall marketing. And so this is why having a really strong business strategy is important because I know that that's not going to be my niche. So I don't want to create a name for my podcast that can't grow with me. Make sure it's easy to spell and pronounce. Sometimes we come up with really like pithy names that are really fun, but they're hard to pronounce or they're hard to remember. And so even though it's fun and cute, try to make sure that it's easy to pronounce, it's easy to remember. Sometimes we do acronyms that don't make sense for people if they're not in a certain industry. So just something else to think about. And like I said, using ChatGPT and Claude is a great way to just brainstorm ideas. I've done that with mine, where, hey, I'm thinking about creating a podcast. This is my target audience. These are my goals. These are the types of topics that I'm going to do. It's going to be an interview show, right? All the things you've decided in the first part of this training. And then, can you help me come up with name ideas? I only want it to be, 4 words, and I want to make sure it includes this word or something like that. And, sometimes it's good, sometimes it's not. I have a client who we named their podcast recently, and I used ChatGPT quite a bit just to come up with some ideas. Then I went and looked and see if there were other podcasts and said, oh, well, if we took this and changed it a little, it's just a way to sort of brainstorm with your computer and get some new ideas. So once you have your podcast name, you're going to want to create a logo. Now, Obviously, the best thing to do is to hire a professional to do this for you, but you don't have to. There are lots of templates out there. I use a website called Creative Market quite a bit they've like pre-made templates for all different types of things. So that's a good option. You can hire a professional. There are templates in Canva as well. But I really recommend utilizing your brand elements like colors and fonts to maintain brand consistency. So you can see how I've done that. This is the on the left-hand side, this is the logo for my upcoming podcast, Your Marketing Mentor. I recently went through a rebrand. And so this is now in these are all of my brand colors, right? I'm wearing my brand colors. I'm using my fonts. And so, really incorporating those things into your podcast logo will just help it to look a little bit more consistent. I did this with my Bosses with Baggage podcast as well. This is sort of my old look and feel. So, I need to decide as that podcast moves forward, do I change the look and feel? Do I leave it? So, I'm still sort of making that decision. But as I'm launching a new podcast, I want to make sure that it ties in with my branding. I already spent a lot of money building that up. I spent a lot of time on it. And so may as well use it. And again, it creates a visual cue for your audience. You want to use an image of you as the host. I'm a big fan of this. People buy from people. And I strongly believe that having a picture of you, especially if you're creating a personal brand, is really essential. Your podcast is going to be a huge part of growing your personal brand. So you want to have your picture there sort of on the thumbnail of your podcast. And that's, where we talk about a logo, for a podcast, it's generally just this little square that is used as sort of the podcast thumbnail on all the places where the podcast are, on YouTube and so forth. So you don't necessarily have to have sort of a separate logo that you can utilize. Often this little square is everything that you need, this thumbnail. I call it a logo, but it's a thumbnail. Make sure that it can be identifiable in small formats. So sometimes we have too many words or we use some kind of funky texts. One of the things that I like to do anytime I've done branding, and I've done branding for huge multinational organizations where we have rebranded everything worldwide. It's a big project. But when we're deciding on the logo, you always want to print it on a piece of paper and put it up on your wall and then start walking backwards as far as you can and see if you can still read it from far away. If you can't read it from at least the other side of the room, you need to go back and rethink about your logo. Again, Canva has lots of incredible templates. The other thing I would do is ask your audience. I was working on my podcast thumbnail logo the other day for my Marketing Mentor podcast, and I couldn't decide. So I put it out onto my Facebook page and just asked my friends, hey, give me some feedback. And because I use Facebook as a place to stay in touch, not only with friends, but with clients, I got tons of great feedback. And actually, this was the winning logo, and it wasn't even the one that I wanted. It was like my least favorite, but everyone really resonated to that picture. So I'm so glad that I asked for feedback, especially from my target audience, because they know best what's going to resonate with them. Sometimes what we think is going to resonate won't necessarily do so. So definitely do some research before you make a final decision. So I want to share one of my favorite podcasts, but also they do such a good job of their overall branding and sort of how they've done their logo and how they utilize their graphic elements in all their different places. And so I kind of wanted to show you them as an example. So the name of the podcast is Wisdom of the Sages. It's hosted by Raghunath and Kastuba. This is Kastuba and Raghunath. Over in the upper right-hand corner. Raghunath is one of my yoga teachers, and Kastuba as well. I listen to this podcast almost every day. But they've done a really nice job. They're very consistent with the colors, right? They're consistent. They've got the same font. They're very consistent with this blue and the orange. They've got these microphones that they use in some places. They've got this great graphic of sort of a sage, looking kind of guy. They make sure that it actually is on the bottom of the screen when they have the thumbnail for YouTube. They just do a really, really nice job of branding the podcast as its own entity. Now, if they had their own business together, I would also recommend that they use these same fonts, these same colors in their own business branding. They don't, and so they don't do that for their own. They both have separate kind of things going on, and they do this podcast together. But I would encourage that for you, but this is just a nice example of how you can consistently market your podcast and everything that you do. Also, the other cool thing that they've done is they actually have a whole merch section because they've got so many fans, and I've actually got a few of these t-shirts and I love them. And so it's another, just kind of thought as you're putting things together. It's nice to have some real strong visual icons that you can use, if someday you get popular enough that you do merch. So great example of a really, really strong podcast brand. The next thing you need to think about is your podcast intro and exit. So if you are a regular listener of podcasts, you'll know that at the beginning, they'll generally say like, welcome to the podcast. I'm your host, blah, blah, blah. And here is the, point of the podcast. Here's what we do around here, right? Something like that. Usually about I try not to go over one or 2 minutes. 2 minutes is probably too long, but a minute is kind of the sweet spot for an introduction. This is a great thing that you can also use ChatGPT to do if you'd like, is, kind of have it write it for you. And I actually did that with my marketing mentor one. I didn't use exactly what they came up with, but it was a really good start. It was a great draft for me to work from. So you're going to want to create an introduction that you put at the beginning of all of your podcasts. And then you're going to also want an exit. So once your podcast is done, or the interview is done, you're going to have a standard exit that you put on every single podcast. And that will be something like, thank you for listening to the show. We appreciate our sponsors, blah, blah, blah. If you're lucky enough to have sponsors. We don't cover sponsors in this training, but if any of you guys want an extra training on that, just give me a holler and let me know. So in that exit, you can say like, thank them for listening, invite them to like, share, subscribe the show, ask them to rate, and ask them to share it with their friends. I'm putting together a piece of bonus content on this topic because I didn't want to go into too much technology here, but there's going to be a bonus training that goes with this where I'm going to show you how I create my intro and my exit for a podcast. You can use some of the tools that we're going to talk about later on today to create those. The great thing is once you've created them, you're done and you don't ever have to use them again. You just put them at the beginning and the end of your podcast every time. But I'm going to show you how you can record the intro and the exit and then how you would add them into your podcast as well. So take a look at that. One of the most common questions next from a preparation of your marketing materials perspective is, do I need a website? I don't think so. If you have your own business and you're creating your own brand, unless you are doing this with a partner who isn't part of your business, right? Going back to that wisdom of the sages example, right? They may want to have a separate website because their businesses don't connect. But if most of the people listening to this are going to do podcasts that are directly connected with their brand. And if that's the case, I don't think you need to have a separate website. You can create the web address, the URL, and have it redirect to your website if you want, but I think it's fine to just have a section of your website that's about your podcast. I actually put one as an example here in that screenshot over on the right-hand side. That's one of my clients. Her name is Asia Mahmood. She's amazing at delegation, growing your business through kind of effective systems and teams. And she has a really great podcast. I've been on it, so check it out. But she has, as you scroll down her page, you can see there's just a podcast section. So it says, favorite podcast episodes. It's got, listen now. It actually has a link to be able to apply to be a guest on the podcast. So she's done this really, really well on her website. So I would just recommend that. I don't think you need to do anything more. You could even, and this is what I actually do on my website at the time that I'm recording this, is I actually on the top of my website have a podcast link. You just click on it and it actually sends you to a page where you can see all of the different recordings. And it actually just goes right to my YouTube page where I have all the recordings. And we'll talk about that here in a little bit. The next question, and kind of related, is do I need a special social media handle or should I have a separate YouTube channel for this? Again, I think that that's more work than is often required. If you're creating your own business, this is directly connected with your business, directly created with your or connected with your personal brand. I don't think there's any reason to create a whole separate Instagram identity or a whole separate YouTube identity. You can. It would be great, but it's a lot of work and probably, frankly, not worth it. If you've got a team of people who can help you, great. But I don't think it's worth it. I don't do it with my business. I don't find it necessary. I actually like to use it as content for my marketing for my Sherry Sutton business. And so I don't think you need to have a separate one.